We are on the afternoon break in the questioning of Chris Nineham at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. Chris was a member of Globalised Resistance and Stop the War Coalition and Socialist Workers' Party, where he was spied on by the undercover police officer HN118, who's the cover name. Simon Wellings, to infiltrate Globalised Resistance and related groups between 2003 and 2005, no, 2002 and 2005, and then went on to put himself in a position to report on the Dissent Network. I'm joined by Lindsay German from the Stop the War Coalition. Lindsay, what do you make of what we've heard from Chris so far?
Well, what I make of it is I've felt when I've given evidence and when I've heard previous people giving evidence is that you really feel they're not getting to the heart of what the issue is. I always find it quite astonishing. We're here not as people who have done anything wrong, but as people who actually have been spied on repeatedly, in some cases a real abuse of our personal lives and circumstances and so on. And I find it incredible that so little is given to the evidence or supposed evidence from, in this case, Simon Wellings. So I feel that the questions about how many times did you meet the police and so on really are a matter of record which could easily be found. And let's get to the heart of what the question is, which is why have we been spied on? Why are protesters constantly spied on? This war was deeply unpopular, as is the current war on Iran, and yet we're treated as somehow unorthodox as people who don't have the right to say this. So that's what I feel very, very strongly. Obviously, as Chris has made a perfectly good point about a range of things, but you do feel we're not getting to the real question here, and I find that time and time again.
It was. I mean, there was a point where they called up one of the reports, and I heard someone in the public gallery go, "Oh, it's a document." Is that kind of feeling? Or we are actually getting to what this is all meant to be about, which is the reporting of undercover police on people. And we did see a couple of reports, though, as you say, not many. There was a lot of questions around stuff, which, as you say, I mean, is a matter of public record. I mean, Chris was even asked at one point how many people were arrested on the 15th of February 2003 march against the Iraq War. He says, I think I can remember 12. I mean, we were just chatting as we came in here. I think it was actually less than that. But I mean, those figures are publicly available. Should they want to, they could. Why don't they ask the police? Why are you asking a witness? I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's a waste of everybody's time and money. And you might as well ask him what he had for breakfast on February the 15th, 2003. It's probably as interesting. So I really feel they're missing something important here. And it's a very strange way to have an inquiry where so much is allowed for the undercover police, that they're allowed not to give evidence, they're allowed not to give their names, that they can do it anonymously, all this kind of thing. And yet the people they spied on aren't given the same kind of respect or attention to. So big problem, I think. I mean, I hope we will get some good report coming out of this, but I mean, you've been here much more than I have. You've dedicated yourself year after year to doing it, and that is a great service to everybody.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I ended up doing that really, but there we go.
I know, just luck. Obviously, your lucky star was there. So, but these are the questions we need to know. This is a big undercover policing operation which has cost probably billions over the years. And what are we really finding out?
I mean, the reports that we have seen that mention Chris Nineham by Simon Wellings, there's a lot of, I mean, what essentially, I mean, fairly sectarian sort of comments about the way in which Globalised Resistance was organised, the relationship between the Stop the War Coalition and the Socialist Workers' Party. Some like wholly, and I mean, like just laughable, really, kind of suggestions that Chris was suggesting that activists take their frustrations against the Iraq War out on petrol forecourts, which, I mean, just like an insane suggestion. I mean, as someone who was very much involved in the much more direct action stuff at the time, I didn't really attend Stop the War Coalition events that much. I went to a few, but mostly I was involved with direct action with the anarchist movement. The idea that Stop the War would have ever done anything like that, I mean, we wouldn't have done that, let alone Stop the War do it. I mean, it's just an insane idea in that report.
Yeah, it is. And you think about it, it's physically dangerous. I don't mean by people getting arrested, but you've got petrol. So you would think carefully about this, plus the point he made that you don't want to direct it at ordinary people working in a service station. You obviously would be going to the headquarters of BP or the other big oil companies. You'll be doing that kind of action. You'll be going to their shareholders meetings, whatever you decide to do. And it's these stuff, they must just sit around and think, what can we say that Chris Nineham is going to do now? Also, the idea that after you have a sit down in Whitehall, that somehow you can go into the Red Lion in Whitehall and Chris can lead a discussion. I mean, you know, the pub will be absolutely full. Everybody will be crowded, and there's no serious discussion. So this is tittle tattle and gossip, and it's seriously not worth the paper it's printed on, this kind of stuff. And I find this time and again from the undercover police.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much of it, and so much of it is that setting. It's, you know, it's a few pints deep in the pub. They've overheard somebody say something and thought, oh, that's a good idea. I'll stick that in my report and I'll attribute it to one of the leaders of the group that I'm spying on. And
exactly. So there'll be hundreds of demonstrators in the pub. As you say, after a few pints, people make all sorts of. I mean, there was an old song in the '60s called "As Soon as This Pub Closes," and the whole idea is, well, we'd all go off and do something. You know, the revolution starts. Then we know actually people say all sorts of things in pubs that shouldn't be taken too seriously, and we're absolutely certain, I think, that Chris Nineham wouldn't have been saying these things.
And I mean, it's notable that, you know, that Simon Wellings, according to his own reports, was drinking 100 pints a month during his time within.
This is when he got a police salary, I guess, because he wouldn't have done it as a normal activist.
I mean, it's worth noting he was the highest paid special demonstration squad officer ever.
What was the justification for that? Because he seems to have been one of the more incompetent ones.
I mean, that is certainly the impression we get. But I mean, essentially, I mean, partially it's because it was towards the end of the unit. He was one of the last ones in the field. He was in the field for the longest time. He was, as he called it, the field daddy, which is a very strange name. But
let's not delve too much into that one.
Yeah, quite. But I mean, he filed over 4,000 reports, of which the inquiries had sight of 1,000, of which we've seen a few hundred. What we've actually seen is a lot of these reports. There's 4 or 5 filed on the same day. They includes information that crosses over. I mean, like Guy Taylor said, you know, he saw 3 reports that were just reporting his phone number. We get the impression that you know, what Simon Wellings was doing was, you know, inventing things, sitting at home, going on email lists. You know, particularly when it comes to when he was sporting on dissent much later on, that, you know, he didn't really have sight of any particular proper intelligence. He was copying and pasting stuff off the internet. But what comes down to is that people kind of say, oh, this is incompetence. But what it actually ended up with was the police then having all these reports where they could go, look, these people are actually really dangerous. These protesters, you might think they're just walking around with banners and placards, but in reality, they've got these secret plots. And that justifies us clamping down on them in all the ways that we've seen happening, which goes right up to today.
Well, it's so much worse today than anything we saw in 2003. And a very, very dangerous time, I think, for all of us who are active in terms of the laws, the way the police are applying them. And actually, nearly every time a jury gets in to decide on these things, they acquit people. But the police are determined to keep criminalizing. No, and they do it in such a way that you just feel, as you say, that you've got this, you know, these tightly knit group of dangerous people who are just manipulating everything else. Shows they know nothing. I mean, they're supposed to have infiltrated for years. You think they might understand how people work, and whether it's socialists or anarchists or anybody on the left, actually democracy and involving people is a very big part of what we do. And it's very important to us that you discuss, do we want to do this action? Now, some of the things you might then say is, well, if we're going to do it at such a time, we're not going to discuss that with a large number of people, but you are open about what you want to do, and there's no point in being on the left or being socialist if you're not prepared to be open and involve as many people as you can. And that's completely, it tells you exactly how hierarchical the police are and how they see this as every organisation mirrors them, but actually every organisation doesn't mirror them. It's exactly the opposite.
I mean, it is amazing, really, that, you know, I mean, you've given evidence twice at the inquiry. That was looking back at events much earlier than we're looking at now. And we're getting to the end of the SDS now, and they, like you say, they've learned nothing in terms of how groups actually operate. And you get the impression that it's because they didn't really care about that. It wasn't about the facts. It was about justifications. They were looking for things that they could say were justifications. I mean, I know that later on, when we look at the MPORU, Mark Kennedy reports that there's a certain individual he's reporting on talks a lot of shit in the pub when he's drunk, which is really good for us. And it's like, why is it good for you? Because it's made up. He knows he's admitting it's made up, but they want made up stuff.
That's right. And they want to trap people into saying things that, and of course, there's all sorts of people, whether drunk or sober, you might say things. If somebody questioned you, you'd say, well, actually, I didn't really mean it like that. I'm absolutely going to kill him, for example, when
right.
somebody does something that annoys you,
Mm.
doesn't actually mean you're going to go and kill somebody. But all of these are taken in the most literal way. They're taken from a very hostile point of view, and they're there to make sure that left politics, protest politics, are regarded as illegitimate and not acceptable in supposedly civilized society. And yet, time and again, all the things that we've all campaigned about have been vindicated, have been shown to be right, whether it's on climate, whether it's on war, whatever the issue is. And yet this is not only isn't acknowledged, that they behave in exactly the way which tries to criminalize it further.
Yeah, and I mean, as you say, Leonie was saying that the whenever juries get faced with these cases, they acquit. We've now got a situation where the government's trying to get rid of jury trials.
That's right, and that's a Labour government. What a scandal!
Yeah,
what a scandal from David Lammy that's what he wants to do. And yeah, I mean, I did a law degree very, very long time ago, so I make no claims, but I do know that we were taught about the British legal system, including the jury system and the importance of juries. You would not recognise it now from what I was taught. When I was a young student, you wouldn't recognise it because they've taken away so many rights that the court system is absolute chaos, absolute chaos. None of it works properly at all. And people are being unjustly convicted a lot of the time.
I'm aware it's only a short break. They're probably restarting. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, just to say that we've got to keep up campaigning on this, and whatever the things that are coming out, we have to use them as widely as possible. I'd just like to thank you for all the things that you do, and
thanks very much
for the rest of us. Thanks very much.
No worries. Thanks for joining us. Please like, share, and subscribe to these videos. It makes a huge effect on how widely they're seen. And we'll do a longer recap after Chris finishes his evidence at the end of the day.